Hey, this is Notser, and today we're going to be talking about the brand new AA system coming in 8.7. I want to thank UCC Master, Wooden Glaze, and Fry Guy for assisting. This is also including the priority sector system. And I also want to talk about defensive AA, the continuous damage layering, the style of damage that they've adjusted with AA. It's all beautiful and wonderful, and hopefully you appreciate it. And then we're going to go over to the Zhao, probably one of the worst tier 10 cruisers for AA. And we're going to equip it with Fierce Firing. Fierce Fire is the brand new manual AA replacement skill, and basically, it changes priority sector to an instantaneous damage with a long cooldown. Priority sector default in 8.7 is the following. Upon activation, you instantaneously do enough damage to probably kill a aircraft or two. You have a ramp-up state where your AA gun mounts on one side of your ship go from 100% state up to 150% state damage. On the weak side, it goes from 100%, drops down to 50%. And then it caps out at the maximum continuous damage for 5 seconds. So for 5 seconds, you're doing equivalent damage output to the old priority sector if you predicted appropriately the direction the enemy is coming from. And then once the cooldown reaches full usage, you have to wait for it to come back off of cooldown. And that's the change from green on the compass to sort of an orange. That's indicating that your AA is capped at 100% damage and you can't do any more. You can't use priority sector until it comes off of cooldown. Now, here's a good example of a slingshot attack with the new priority sector. So, enemy uses slingshot, he has immunity frames. Note that I activated it and I didn't knock any of his aircraft off, and there was no damage numbers on his squadron. He used the immunity frames that Slingshot provides to absorb my priority sector. And this is something that is completely possible with this new updated version of priority sector. By default, the damage output against aircraft is in white. And once you enhance it with priority sector, it will switch over to red. So a good way of avoiding that unfortunate slingshot absorption is to wait until you see DPS numbers again. Remember, Wargaming made it to where the DPS numbers occur more frequently to confirm the damage is capable. You use that to time out your priority sector to maximize your damage output. But a skillful player with Slingshot and someone who's not completely aware of the absorption capabilities of Slingshot might use priority sector incorrectly and be unable to benefit from it. So that's one thing that they've created sort of as a counterplay to the Slingshot, and something you need to consider as a surface ship to get the most out of it. Now, you could totally ignore using priority sector, but your damage output would be pretty low against aircraft carrier, and you wouldn't be able to keep up with the incoming. You just wouldn't. This is something that needs to be incorporated in your basic play. It is as natural to use as damage control. And that's great, because we didn't have this previously. And you'll note I can't freely switch the priority sector. I can't. Oh, sorry! I accidentally meant to do it on my port side rather than my starboard side. No, that's not how it works. The cooldown goes, and then it has to recharge, and then you can reassign it once again. But if you misplay it, that's a window for the player to take advantage of from an air standpoint. So far it looks pretty interesting, right? We're shooting out a ton of aircraft. Obviously they're testing it, and they are absolutely trying to kill me. I mean, maybe the first couple of passes they weren't, when they weren't totally certain that this is working. Once again, here he is using a slingshot. I'm waiting. I did it again. I used priority sector too early. The instantaneous is absorbed. If I would have waited to use priority sector until I saw the damage numbers, I probably would have knocked the squadron out before it even dropped on me. Now, if I could critique this system, it needs to have a little bit more feedback that you're actually using it. The only thing on the screen that says that I'm using it is the compass. And that's great, but I need a little bit more feedback to really feel fully in control. And for this to be incorporated in basic play, it just needs to highlight that I'm using it and highlight the return on the use a little bit more so that I feel a little bit comfortable with the system. And And, as we've seen, obviously this is the Des Moines, so it's doing really well. Now, you might notice it's doing a little bit better than it used to. That is because Wargaming has fixed the AA layering. There is no longer dedicated sections, long, medium, and short, where that is your DPS and that is only your DPS. It layers as you get closer to the target. It initially starts out with long range, which is flak. The flak layer sort of overlaps with the mid AA range. The medium range AA system layers with the long range, so you have a lot of continuous damage. And then the short range layers even further. So you're not stuck in a situation where, oh, maybe my long range is really good and my short range is complete garbage. So when you enter into different AA auras in the previous version, you might find yourself taking, 0 damage done. That really sucked, and it didn't make any sense. Why would you hold fire with your AA systems if you're under active attack? Now, this does mean that continuous damage is a lot higher. In compensation, Wargaming is probably going to have to balance the numbers a little bit, but your total AA is contributing to defending yourself. It's when the AA range is effective, it'll start activating and it'll go until, the mount's dead or whatever. So, really happy for that change. We weren't good enough to dodge that. Now we're going to try to see what defensive AA looks like, coupling it with priority sector. So they reduced the continuous damage from defensive AA. They boosted the flak damage that defensive AA has, though. It does like 400%, whereas continuous is only enhanced by, I think, 30% or 50%. So defensive AA isn't really a skill for medium and short range. It's to protect yourself from an initial advancement of the enemy now. Your real defensive AA is priority sector. Everyone's priority sector is their own defensive AA, and I think that's awesome. This is absolutely what I was hoping for from the game. I've always wanted it to feel like the player has direct control over defending their ships. Even if their AA is, average, their use with abilities will make them above average. The player's skill is the most important stat when it comes to the AA game now. Here we're taking a look at the fierce firing skill. This is replacing the manual AA skill, and it removes all of the continuous ramp up, and it just has an upfront component. And boy, does it have an upfront component. Shoot down instantly 4 aircraft, but it goes on a 30-second cooldown. My AA is capped at 100% damage output for this cooldown cycle of the priority sector. But when you shoot, 4 aircraft, 5 aircraft, or 3 aircraft on average up front, it feels pretty good. You've done something to reduce the aircraft carrier's extended attack time on your ship. Now, this cooldown is different based on the type of ship. For cruisers and DDs, it's 30 seconds. For battleships, it is 45 seconds. 45 seconds is long enough that a squadron could, maybe juke, maybe use slingshot, fully absorb it, and then continuously attack you for the full time that you are unable to enhance your AA damage output. It's a really fascinating skill, coupling it with this new priority sector design. It's one that I think players will like because it really puts some punch into the AA, but it does cost 4 points, so it's good to see so much benefit in the system that isn't, completely guaranteed to be better. Like, this is clearly not better if you can use your ship's continuous damage ramp up time and angle appropriately. You will end up doing more damage overall. But if you're someone really struggling, or the AA on the ship really struggles, like a real struggle bear, the Italian cruisers have terrible AA, terrible short-range AA. This would probably work out for them, because the aircraft would get so close that you couldn't even benefit from the full continuous damage ramp based on the range, So it's a very fascinating design that they've created with all of this in mind. And it's one that's really rewarding. I really feel like I'm actually attacking aircraft now. And also, one thing I love that they chose to do is there's no cap on the number of squadrons that you can defend yourself from. If there's 3 separate squadrons and fighters and all this stuff inside your AA bubble, your priority sector does damage to all of them. It scales much better when there's 2 and 3 carriers, and if those 2 and 3 carriers want to attack you exclusively, you can put out just as much damage towards them all as you could against one, with priority sector in mind. Now, of course, there's always within reason sort of thing, but having priority sector always there contributing, even on the off squadron that isn't focused down, it's so much better. The feedback's so much better. And you notice using the Fierce Fire, the DPS numbers never change. They're always white. White signifying that you're not having any enhancement done to the continuous output. But you also notice that those white numbers, they just ramp up. The number gets bigger. It doesn't go through weird auras where long, medium, and short have 3 different continuous DPS numbers. All those numbers tie in together and they just make one bigger number. And that's what it should have always felt like. And it's one of the great changes. It's the reason why you weren't getting this video 2 or 3 days sooner, because they made that change sort of halfway in between the 8.7 public test server round 1 testing. And I'm real happy with it. The numbers might be a little off and a little high. Clearly I'm shooting down a ton of aircraft. Clearly they're just throwing their bodies at the problem because I want to see. Oh, note the Haku. Note the Haku. He's using his slingshot. He's immune, he's immune, he's immune. Now he's not immune, and boom, I'm going to use priority. We're going to knock out some aircraft, and we still are able to defend ourselves and contribute. Even in that last moment, there's still a reason to use priority sector. It's not too late. So I like that. It's a good change. Now, the numbers are default white unless it has a ramp up of continuous damage. Defensive AA is sort of different, where obviously the continuous portion is much lower and the flak portion is much higher. So you're supposed to use defensive AA as a lead-in, so your flak does the most damage. And you can obviously use priority sector on cooldown with defensive AA, or you could wait until they get closer so you can have a more consistent damage output on the targets, and maybe they've sustained enough that bursting them down, you get into their final squadron or something like that, and it throws off their aim, right? So there's a lot of play that's available. Ooh, we got like 3 different squadrons, and we knocked out a good amount of aircraft. There's a lot of different play here that just wasn't available, and oh, are we going to survive? I want to survive long enough to test defensive AA. I want to see if defensive AA switches the AA to red numbers signifying damage output increase, or if it stays with the white by default. And we'll know in a second once they get close. They're trying to do all their slingshot stuff. They really want to try and see the immunity for it. Yes. So defensive changes it to sort of a dark red to signify that it's being beneficial. And I think the default priority sector is sort of a lighter red. And then base 100% continuous damage is white. So there is actually an indication, finally, for looking at the aircraft and seeing direct feedback. We just need a little bit more of that, Wargaming. We need sort of maybe a cursor activation indicator for priority sector. If you have any suggestions that you'd like to see added to this, please don't hesitate. Maybe even some sort of, I don't know, maybe a screen indicator that priority sector is off cooldown would be nice too. Maybe an option or a choice. But, you know, the system itself, it's a lot better. It's a lot more direct control over, do I want to use it on this squadron? Do I want to wait until he's closer and he's committed and then, you know, use the burst? My only criticism needs more direct feedback to the player that they activated. Maybe a button on the screen, something near the crosshair or the cursor, some sort of flash, or, you know, some sound. Something to tell the player you've done this. And also, just obviously tweak the numbers because they're a little off. But 2 thumbs up for me. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to check out more of my content, you can click the most recent or the most relevant uploads. You could also choose to subscribe to my channel. We do daily World of Warship videos, first impression, how-to, news, and review related. My North American recruit invite is on the screen. You can take advantage of that. I stream at twitch.tv/Notser. Thank you, have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you next time.